there was no commander-in-chief. This is the second responsibility of the president of Nigeria.
A constitution is the arm and the ammunition of a government. A constitution gives power to the leaders, the politicians, and the government to be able to carry out executive orders and executive functions. A constitution is a doctrine of necessity for every government to be able to function adequately and effectively. Now, this is a revelation made by former President Goodluck Jonathan on the succession crisis shortly after the death of former President Umaru Musa Yar'adua. President Goodluck Jonathan has opened up a powerful lens through which Nigerians can re-examine the constitutional fragility, the political maneuvering, and the evolution of executive authority in Nigeria. His account illuminates a pivotal moment in Nigeria's democratic history, where legal ambiguity and ethnic political interests collide, requiring an extraordinary parliamentary intervention known as the doctrine of necessity, which is the Constitution. Let us not forget that the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria is a governing lifeline to the executive order of governing Nigeria. When all of this was going on, Nigeria became a nation without a functioning president. The National Assembly has to quickly take unprecedented steps by invoking the doctrine of necessity. On February 9, 2010, the legal innovation, though not explicitly provided for in the Constitution, allowed Jonathan to be declared acting president. And this action was widely supported by civil society groups and, in fact, the general public of Nigeria.
We were approving memos from ministers, so the government was going on. But there was no commander-in-chief. This is the second responsibility of the president of Nigeria, besides being the executive head of the country. And there's nothing like acting commander-in-chief. Either you're a commander-in-chief or not. But when you become an acting president, you are at the same time a commander-in-chief. So that was lacking, and no country allows that gap. A country like America, they don't allow that gap at all. Yes. If American president wants to, even if it's a Whitlow, that he require anesthesia, that he will be off for 5 minutes, he will hand over to the vice president. Yes. Before that procedure. Immediately regain consciousness to take over. But we stayed for some time. And that led to what they call the doctrine of necessity. When the National Assembly felt that the country was in a situation where it was not expected.
Does this tell us that Nigeria needs a clear constitutional amendment to prevent future ambiguity in presidential succession? Now look at it from this angle. When Jonathan said that an aide of yar'adua deliberately withheld the letter that should have allowed him to function as acting president, what does this mean? In the Nigerian politics of today, it means that even at the highest level of government, personal interest and regional loyalties can obstruct due process. Jonathan was the constitutional successor, yet he was treated as an outsider, denied full authority, not because the law was not clear or the law was unclear, but because a segment of the political elite was unwilling to let go of power. That experience must have left an indelible mark on him. Now, look at it down the line. It was a harsh initiation into the real politics of Nigeria. But then, Jonathan would have been prepared for anything, because as vice president, you should be expecting anything politically. In Nigeria, where legality can be held hostage by unspoken power, where deals are shared, where trust is often regional and not constitutional, perhaps too early, that power in Nigeria isn't always about office, it is about acceptance by the power bloc. Now, this scenario is a starkly constructed with that of American political system, when even a minor medical procedure requires the president to temporarily transfer power to his vice president. For example, in 2002, the American president George W. Bush temporarily invoked the 25th Amendment for the president to be able to temporarily, within a minute or an hour, transfer power from his office to the office of the vice president, making the vice president commander-in-chief while he goes for a medical procedure. Now, this is how powerful the constitution is. President Umaru Musa was flown down to Saudi Arabia for treatment. Vice President Goodluck Jonathan was incapable of acting as a president because the veto letter that was to be written by the presidency and passed down to the National Executive Council for him to be made president was not passed down to the Executive Council. And therefore, whether the president was incapacitated and unable to govern the nation or not, he was the president. And therefore, the vice president cannot do anything within his power. But of course, he attended other national executive councils, but then he couldn't take executive action, executive orders. This is what the Constitution is for. Executive orders that governs the people. You cannot take action without the Constitution telling you to do so. When we talk about the deep regional cleavages within Nigerian politics, the country's informal power rotation, the agreement often all refer to what? A zoning system of government. Therefore, if the North is to hold power for 8 years, the South must wait. In case the president of the Federal Republic dies before the 8-year term, the North or the South or whichever zone is hosting that has the power of the ruling power at the time will feel entitled for the remainder of the years that the presidency is supposed to stay within their zone. This is what the North felt at the time. When the presidential aide to President Umaru Musa Yar'adua deprived the entire constitution from taking its action by empowering the vice president to be acting president at the time, it was because the northern leaders has armed him to say, until we decide whether or not this tenure will complete 8 years, the constitution can be put on hold because it's already zoned the leadership, the presidency to the north. So Yar'adua died before his 8-year term completed, and therefore the north felt he has to complete. So was the constitution not clear enough to say when the president dies, the vice president take over power? This is where the regional manipulation and maneuvering of the constitution itself, where we see the failure of the constitution. In another term, it is not a failure, it is manipulation by those in the corridor of power, because those in the corridors of power were manipulating the constitution. And therefore, the people think the constitution failed. The constitution clearly states that if a president dies, let me check. If the president dies, power will be transferred to the vice president on a written letter. So if the president is about, let's assume that the president dies on an emergency or from an accident. Assume he takes his flight just crashed and the president dies. The constitution has already dictated what happened next. Now let's assume that President Umaru Musa Yar'adua just went for an international trip and then he didn't return as a result of an accident or a plane crash. Would they now suspend the constitution? Would they say that, okay, the constitution didn't tell us that if the presidency from the north did not complete his 8 years tenure and he dies, the north must provide a successor to be able to complete the 8 years. This was the power of the constitution being played over by people in the corridors of power. The country's informal power rotation agreement, often referred to as zoning, between the North and the South was at stake. Now, during the time that Goodluck Jonathan was vice president, there was no plan, there was no expectation that the northern leadership, the northern presidency that was to last for 8 years would terminate halfway towards the 8 years. So this zoning was at stake. It is either there is an intervention or the zoning will crash. Now, this is where the constitution intervenes. Many northern elites fear that a Jonathan's presidency would disrupt this balance. Were they correct? Yes. Because if the Jonathan administration, as it were, the Jonathan was from the south, he was vice president. the zoning as at the time was not to the south but to the north. But accidentally, the northern president died. Now, was the government of the Goodluck Jonathan administration a zoned administration? It wasn't zoned. It wasn't a zoned tenure. Goodluck Jonathan completed the tenure of the then northern presidency.
Responsibilities of the president. You know, the president of Nigeria has two main responsibilities. First, you're the chief executive of the country, so like a prime minister of a country. That the vice president can assume you don't need any transfer. And I was doing that because we're having executive council meeting, we're approving memos from ministers, so the government was going on. So the country was tense. Yes. And under this north-south divide, Christian-Muslim divide, it was really tense. And every day I was hearing about coup. I remember one day, I will not mention the names of some of my friends, came to look, vice president, that time I was not even acting. They have not even moved the doctrine of necessity. I was still the vice president. No, you don't have to sleep here. You have to come and sleep in my guest house. And so on. I said, no, I will stay in the state house. If anybody wants to kill me, it's better you kill me in the state house, so the Nigerians will know that they assassinated me in the state house. They know I have not committed any offense. If I decided to go and stay in a guest house, and wherever I'm going, security people would know. And if people go and kill me there, they will now say Indian girls brought apple to kill me. And I wouldn't want those kind of stories. But if they assassinate, it's better that I die here in the state house than being assassinated outside the state house, because all kinds of stories will come up. So that was how tense it was. And to me, I was not bothered. Really, I was not bothered. And I was very calm. But that was the scenario.